Hi, my name is Miles, and in this video we're going to explore how to shoot a real estate video. Now I'm going to outline my whole approach, and I'm going to split it into three general sections. What to do before the shoot, what gear you might need to consider, and thirdly, what to do when you're actually there. I would consider the videos in the real estate world to fall into either two camps. I think that's a walkthrough video and more of a creative approach. And whichever one you're looking at doing is going to depend on what kind of business model you've got set up, what kind of business you're attracting, and also the budget that you're working with. A generic walkthrough for me is going to be a bit more matter of fact. You're just going around the house, maybe on a gimbal, and you're showing off what's in the house in a linear fashion, and you might only have 1 or 2 hours on site, and you just want to get a video done to show what's in the house. The second type is going to include the walkthrough shots, but also you're going to have more time on set because it's probably a bigger budget, and you're going to allow yourself to be a bit more creative with what you're shooting. You're going to think about your composition, maybe go for some symmetry, some rule of thirds. You might get some close-up shots to show off some details. And then in the edit, you might get a bit fancier with what you do in terms of your transitions and how you show off the house. So bear in mind what the budget is for this particular shoot, and then think about assembling some kind of a shot list. Now I know a shot list might sound a bit strange for a real estate shoot, but you want to get hold of any kind of details that they really need to show off in the video that absolutely have to be in the video. And I would recommend writing those down just that you can't forget them on the day. The timing of your shoot is also going to be a really big factor. And this again might be dictated by the estate agent that you're working for or the budget that you're working with. So I'd personally rather sell a property when it's bathed in sunshine. I think that's when it's more likely to attract attention and get a sale. But if you haven't got control over that and you know that it's going to be a cloudy day, then at least the silver lining on those clouds is that you might get a softer light inside the houses, and you might be able to better balance the exposure on the inside compared to the outside, and you might then not have blown out windows in your shots. So what I mean by that is when you're shooting in a room that's going to be darker than what the conditions are outside, you're going to be exposing for the room so that you can see the details in the room and all the colours are quite vibrant. That means that the outside bit gets exponentially brighter, and the chances are that if you're seeing sky or any brightly lit areas outside of the window, they might lose the detail and they might appear pure white while you can see clearly what's going on inside the room. When it comes to gear, personally I'm on the GH5, which I think is really good for this type of work, except when it's dark in the room because it can be susceptible to noise. Full frame cameras might hold an advantage in low light unless you're working with a GH5S or another dual ISO body, but otherwise you could do this real estate work with quite a lot of different types of camera bodies, so I'm not going to try and go through all of those. Personally, what I like the most is being able to slow my footage down. So I like the GH5 because I can do 4K 50p or 4K 60 if I was in a non-PAL region area. That allows me to slow all my footage down to half speed or even less whilst maintaining the 4K sharpness, and it will make all the shots really smooth. That said, I don't think 4K is strictly a necessity just yet. I'm not really asked for it very often when it comes to my client work, but it does give me flexibility in post to reframe and animate the frame if I need to. I can stabilize and it will still maintain an HD image. And personally, I like working with that sharpness. But if your camera doesn't do 4K, I'd probably be fine with full HD, especially if I can do it in 50 or 60 frames a second. I've seen really good footage from a Canon 6D, for example, and that's not known to be a video beast. Cheaper cameras or weaker codecs might end up being a bit noisier, but ultimately us video guys are going to be way more bothered about that than the clients. Obviously the purpose for a lot of real estate videos is to make rooms look big and make the spaces look airy. You don't want to be cropped in too far on a telephoto lens and have to pan around too much to show what's going on in the room. So I use the Laowa 7.5mm f2 for the GH5, and I think that's probably one of the best micro four thirds options. If you are on full frame, anything around 15mm is going to be really good to get you a nice wide shot. So I like to go really wide, but I don't want much distortion. So fisheye lenses are completely out of the question in my book. You want something as rectilinear as possible. The Laowa on the micro four thirds is okay for that, but it does distort around the edges. So I work around that by not doing too much tilting, because that can really show off the distortion and make it look really weird. This is where I am envious of full frame people that can use the full frame Laowa, because that's zero distortion. I think a gimbal or a glide cam type stabilizer is going to be really important for real estate work. I like the Ronin-S because it can handle my huge Sigma lens, and it's also got a good app that works with it. I can control the GH5's focus and recording from the gimbal itself, which is good. Whatever you're using, you want to practice a little bit to make sure you've got that ninja walk down and you can walk quite smoothly without too much bounce. You also want to be able to pan smoothly as well, so that might mean getting used to either the joystick or twisting the handle in order to get your pans smooth. And some people are going to want to use a slider as well, but I personally think that that's optional. Now, I've seen loads of amazing work from sliders, but there's so much hassle, I think, to take to a set. It would need to be a bigger budget one for me personally, and I'll simulate a slider move with my gimbal anyway. And for a lot of jobs, I think that's going to be enough. I'm not going to go into drones in this video, but aerial shots are also a really cool way to show off the exteriors and to show what's around the house as well if it's in a really nice setting. If you are working on a big budget one and you want to consider lighting, then I use the Godox SL60W, which I quite like. That's a cheaper alternative to the Aputure 120D. Moving on to settings, I would personally shoot 50p or 100p for some shots while I'm doing real estate work. I'm using a timeline of 25 frames a second, so that gives me either half speed slow motion or quarter speed slow motion. If I was in the NTSC region, I'd probably be shooting on 60p or 120p for my really slow motion parts. It's not the law, but for the shutter speed, I'm going to double the frame rate. So when I'm shooting 50p, I'm going to look at 1/100 to begin with. And if I'm shooting 100p, I'm going to look at 1/200 if possible, making sure lights aren't flickering. If my room is really dark and my aperture is as low as I want to get it, and I don't want to increase the ISO anymore, then I will bring the shutter speed down to 1/50 if I have to. And if the room is super dark and I can't light it, then I would even try and go to 25 frames a second with a shutter of 1/25 and just try and keep my motion really smooth and slow. To turn work around quite quickly in lower budget work, I'm going to shoot in a natural profile to make sure that my colours look quite good straight out of the camera. Otherwise, if I'm really going to obsess over overblown windows, I might try looking at HLG or even Vlog to try and keep the detail in those extreme high points, but personally I don't obsess over that. Now, this might be a bit controversial, but I also leave the stabilization on in the camera even if I'm on a gimbal. So the shoot day's arrived and you're going to want to look around the house and think about your approach. Consider where the sun is and whether it's going to make more sense to do some rooms before others. I use a free app called Lumos, which helps me with this. You can direct that at the sky and it will tell you where the sun is and where it's going to be at a certain point in time. Then you can try and work out which areas of the house you want to shoot at first if you really want to avoid blowing out the windows. My personal view is that some windows are going to blow out and you're not going to have flexibility all the time in terms of the areas that you're shooting and the time of day, etc. I don't think it's a cardinal sin to have windows blown out, and for the lower budget jobs I wouldn't worry too much about it. On the bigger budget ones, these are the types of things that you can consider. Have a think about how you can best show off the rooms, best angles to get and what camera movement to do as you're walking in or walking around it, and keep an eye out for those details that you might want some detailed shots of later. So with all that in mind, you're going to plan your route round. You're going to want to cover the externals to get all the property from the outside, any garden, any kind of external features in the area that you want to get. Then I would do one pass of the interior on my gimbal with my super wide, and then I'll do another pass going for the detail shots, maybe on a separate lens. So for me, I like a 25mm, which is a 50mm full frame equivalent, to get those detail shots and get some shallow depth of field. Obviously, if you're working with a lower budget and you're doing a higher volume of real estate walkthroughs, then you might not want to do that second pass for the details. You just want to agree with the estate agents what you'll do up front and then get around the house in the order that makes the most sense to you. So if you've got that odd room which is really too dark to film with your camera, you've bumped the ISO, you've dropped the aperture as much as you can, you've dropped the shutter speed even as much as you can. If it's still too dark, then that's when you could consider lighting if the budget permits. So I would try and bounce that off the ceiling or off the wall away from the actual camera, so that it fills the room with some light, and just make sure it doesn't look really unnatural on camera. If you are able to bounce off a large area of wall or ceiling, then that's going to give you a softer light. It'll almost act like the walls and the ceiling are the source of the light, and that'll give you really softer shadows and everything, which is probably going to be the best look. Lastly, unfortunately, you're going to have to consider whether you need to tidy anything up, and that's ultimately going to help the property sell. So that's it. You've had a look around, you've got your shot list of things that you know you need to cover, you know what angles are going to look the best, and you know which order you're going to do all the rooms. Now you're getting ready to shoot. So here I would suggest, first of all, that while you're dialing in the exposure to get the room right, you also want to look at the white balance on your camera for every room or changing light condition that you're going to face. I personally try and avoid using auto white balance, because at least on the GH5, auto white balance will actually change the white balance mid-shot. So if you've got some elements moving through your scene, it might actually change white balance and look really weird. So I would rather use a fixed preset or set it using a grey card. Failing that, dial in a custom Kelvin value on the camera itself. On the gimbal shots, I'm going to use any one of 4 main type of gimbal moves. That's a straightforward walking push in or a dolly. Sometimes if I've got an interesting floor or ceiling, I'm going to do the same thing but add a tilt in there as well. Sometimes I'll pan with the gimbal and I'll combine that with a walk to give you a smooth arc through a room. And as mentioned earlier, I replicate a slider using the gimbal too. That looks especially good if you've got a foreground or background object which is moving through the frame to give you a nice parallax action. If I'm filming detail shots, then I might be doing them on a gimbal. Although the GH5's body stabilization is so good, I might even do those handheld. If I'm gonna go handheld, personally I like to flip it to 100 frames a second, just so it's still really smooth. For small details, I like an orbit shot, which is just where you point inwards at the object and move your camera around. Otherwise you might tilt the camera or do a little dolly push in. And sometimes it's nice to mix it up by combining these moves. In this case, my detail is going to look quite dark because I'm shooting into the sun, but you get the idea. Personally, when it comes to the gimbal or even any handheld movements, I'm going to try and keep it smooth and steady the whole way. I don't like to turn the gimbal too much either. I'm looking for one smooth movement in each shot. I'm doing each room by room, and I'm going to enter through the doorway maybe, just so I've got some foreground going in front of the frame. And then I'm going to try and execute one slow movement with the gimbal. It's going to look really slow and really professional if you can just get in one smooth movement to show off the best of the room in one go. Then I would cut to another angle if the room is really nice and you've got another angle you want to show off, rather than try and get it all in one continuous shot. Now that's not a rule obviously. If you've got an epic space and you really want to show it off, these rules are all made to be broken, but I would avoid speed ramping too much in post because it can look a bit silly. To my eye, shooting with the camera about here on the gimbal is a bit more attractive than filming at eye level, unless the space is really big and you've got quite high ceilings. As I mentioned, I'm always looking for foreground objects that I can have go past the camera, and that can sometimes give you interesting options for transitions in post. And just bear in mind, if you are shooting a handheld, just to try and keep your movements smaller. You don't want to be trying to walk with the camera and hope to get a smooth result, because that's probably not going to happen. And I'm not going to move my legs much in that situation. I'm going to try and move my body and keep my arms tucked in and quite rigid, and try and get the camera movement just by swaying my body and moving whatever needs to be moved. So that's it. Once you've gone through your shot list, you've gone through all the rooms that you need to, you've got all the perspectives and all the spaces that you want, you've shot them wide, and you might have got some detail shots if you've got the time and budget, you've got your exteriors. You should have some awesome looking footage to work with then in post. Speaking of post, if you want to see a video on how I would edit a real estate video, then please let me know by leaving a like or a comment, and if I get enough, no pressure, then I'll release a video covering that topic next. Thanks for watching this one. Please leave any tips you've got that I might have missed below, or otherwise if you want to shout at me, do it down there, and I'll see you in the next one.